Hey there, everybody, and welcome to North Sail's first webinar for the Newport to Bermuda race in 2022. I'm Peter Eisler. Alongside me is Chris Bedford, my partner in Marine Weather University, and we're kicking off this first of two webinars on the great race to Bermuda, focusing on the weather and the navigation. We've had a great turnout. Thank you for coming and making the time. It's exciting after a hiatus to be thinking about sailing and the challenges in participating in what is one of the oldest and most historic races, ocean races in the world. 1906 goes way back. And so without further ado, I'm going to kick things off because we have a lot of things going on here. I would like to point out that I'm sure all of you know how to work Zoom by now, but down at the bottom, at least at the bottom of my screen, is the toolbar where I can send in a chat. We welcome your questions. We have Tim Dawson, ace sailor, sailmaker, and expert, and great Bermuda race winning sailor who is on board and in the chat room to help monitor the questions. With so many people here, of course, we won't be able to answer them all. We'll try to get to a bunch of them, and Tim will be answering them. Just send the question to everybody, not just to Tim. But as Chris is making his presentation on the weather section, feel free to pose a few questions to Chris. Again, pose it to everyone, and Tim will be collating those and same when I get into the navigation portion. So without further ado, I'm going to do what we're all used to seeing in Zoom, and that is do that. The Newport to Bermuda race 2022. Happy, and Chris and I have done a number of these, all in person up until now. And as I pointed out, we are partners in a project that we started when COVID began, a Marine Weather University, and have done a lot of these Zoom sessions together. And we're very, very proud of the curriculum Chris put together and the material there. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, marineweatheru.com. There's a lot of courses, including the flagship, the fundamentals course, and the advanced course, where you can really learn about the weather and go beyond this guy, your weather app. Oh, you don't see the phone when in the background, but to really add value. And it's sort of like, rather than reading a little clause in a Gabriel Marquez novel, to learn about the guy and who he was, and you get so much more out of it. Or a Beach Boys, listen to a Beach Boys snippet of a Beach Boys song rather than understand what was going on with Brian Wilson. Well, the same thing with weather, which we care about with sailors. That's important to us. And if it's important to you, this is a place where you can learn from the very best about marine weather. All right, let's talk about the offshore sailing game and take a big step back. Newport to Bermuda is a big deal. Even on the fastest boats, it's a few days and nights, and the conditions can be extreme. There have been near hurricanes in this race, some incredible stories over the years, and the people and the boats that go offshore have to be prepared for it. What does it take, though, to win? Well, first of all, you need to make a plan and set realistic goals. Not everybody is going to win, but you can win by just participating or finishing first in your class or doing better than you did last time. But setting those realistic goals are an important first step. Then preparation. And that's what a lot of the second session, which is in 2 weeks, we'll be talking about that later, that Tim Dawson and his team will be putting on the preparation of the boat, the sails, which is what the next webinar is about, and the crew. And you can't do enough of that for going offshore, and none of us ever do enough of it. I've never been on a boat that was really as prepared as it could have been to go offshore. It always seems like when you untie those dock lines, there's still some stuff on the list. Then another thing that it takes is you need to be able to sail fast and safe both day and night while sailing shorthanded, because you're sailing with half the crew on deck if you have a normal watch system. And that's a lot different way of sailing the boat than we do normally. And that nighttime sailing can be quite challenging. And then we need to be able to optimize our human performance and be able to get the sleep, the rest, watch system, food, clothing, all the decision. It's a big challenge. It's a big puzzle, and it all goes into this game we call offshore sailing. Big thanks, by the way, to Sharon Green for sharing these photos with me. I didn't ask her, but I'm sure she is glad that you're enjoying them. And then finally, the weather and strategy and navigation. Make sure you're going the right way. And it's a big challenge going across the Gulf Stream in the Bermuda race and well far away from land. So let's, without further ado, I would like to introduce and bring on board to give his presentation, my weather coach, my weather guru, and longtime good friend, Chris Bedford. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Peter, thanks very much. I appreciate it. And yeah, this is a real classic race, and that's something that we're glad to see back happening again this coming year. We missed it the last time, and we missed a lot of things over the last couple of years, and it's just wonderful to see the activity that's starting already. I think people are chomping at the bit to get going. This race, a lot of you have done it before, I'm sure. Some of you are rookies, and maybe this year, because of the situation, we'll have more rookies involved. But regardless, it's always good to look at the situation and see what you're going to be up against. And that's kind of a good first place to start. And so oftentimes I come in and get involved in things pretty much near the beginning of the show, and that's what we're beginning of the preparation for a race, and that's what we're trying to do here today. So first thing to do is to kind of start out with a historical overview. What is the Northwest Atlantic typically like this time of year? And as Peter said, this race has run the gamut of conditions. But we don't know what this particular year is going to be like, but we can make some generalizations of what the typical weather patterns are. And the place we like to start to do that is by looking at the average weather map. So what I have here is a surface pressure field. This is the average surface pressure for the month of June. And the lines there are isobars. These are lines of constant pressure. And the colors are also related to pressure, just to help sort of draw out some of the details a little bit. And the warmer colors are higher pressure. The cooler colors are lower pressure. And what the first thing that we see, our course obviously running from Newport straight to Bermuda, not a complicated course. Sometimes ocean races go all over the ocean. I'm working a couple of the ultimate trimarans in the Transat Jacques Vabre right now, and they're doing a zigzag down across the equator. We may actually be crossing the equator 4 or 5 times in total when this is all said and done, in order to get from the Havre, France to the Caribbean. So some courses are more difficult than others. This one's actually relatively straightforward. It's just a line pretty much from Newport down to Bermuda, with a few marks in between, but at the start and the finish, but that's pretty much it. So from that side of it, it's pretty straightforward, but it goes through some rather complicated weather. So typically what we have is what's called the Bermuda High sitting over the North Atlantic this time of year. This is sort of a semi-permanent feature. It's seasonal. It's strongest in the summertime when the water is cool relative to the warmed up land in the summer season. In the wintertime, that pattern changes, and we end up with more high pressure over the continents and lower pressure over the water, because the land is colder relative to the water. So that high pressure likes to sit over the colder land surfaces. So it kind of builds up over the colder surfaces. So it kind of builds up in the summertime offshore, somewhere around Bermuda, but it doesn't stay in that area. It kind of moves around, it meanders around depending on the large scale weather pattern. Now there's a feature that extends off of that high that generally extends toward the east coast of the United States, called the Subtropical Ridge. So this is sort of an extension or an elongation of this high pressure toward the coast. And that's an important factor as well, because that ridge sort of moves north and south, depending, again, what's happening in the bigger weather picture. And what's driving that is what's going on with the westerlies. The westerlies are where we get our weather. That's where the low pressure systems are moving. The frontal systems are moving generally from west to east. and they affect the position, strength, and timing of movement of the high pressure and the subtropical ridge down here to the south. And so monitoring what's going on with the weather patterns up here to the moving off of North America relative to the high pressure down here to the south is what's important for this race. And it's always good preparation to start watching those patterns pretty early on, at least about a 30 days or so prior to the start of the race. And what you get if you do that is sort of a feel for how the weather patterns are working, you know, how the low pressure areas are moving, how the fronts are moving off the coast, and how this subtropical ridge and the high are moving around in the Atlantic. And as you watch those patterns, you get more accustomed to it. And in fact, you can kind of start to predict, if you watch long enough, how that sequence of weather patterns is going to work out. So it's really a good idea to start watching the weather for this race pretty early. You don't start the day before. You certainly don't start the day of. You want to be looking at it several weeks at least beforehand to see how things are working. Now, there's also one other feature that's kind of important for this race, and it's this trough. It's there's sort of generally low pressure up to the north over eastern Canada. And that basically extends a trough, or an extension of it comes down to the south west along the coast. And it kind of sits in here just on average right along the New England coast and down toward the mid-Atlantic. But it too sort of moves in and out. It weakens, it comes and goes. It's just kind of there as a feature, but it's an important feature. One of the things it helps to drive is how strong the sea breezes are in Newport and along the southern coast of New England. So this in the summertime. So this trough's kind of an important little thing. It looks kind of innocuous on this chart, but if you start watching the weather beforehand, like I said, you'll be able to see this trough making some impact on the winds across the northern part of this race course. So just to give us some sense of how these things work, I put the weather map up here for the last time this race was run, which was in June of 2018. This was the starting day here. We had, you can see the course over from Newport down to Bermuda. And this is the Noaa surface analysis. These are available to you while you're underway during this race. These are very good charts. I highly recommend that you start using them if you aren't, and getting used to how they look. They are freely available on the Noaa Ocean Prediction Center website, and it's a great way to monitor the weather conditions along this course. And what we saw before the start, or on the start day in 2018, was we had a front that had moved off of New England and was moving down toward Bermuda, and a bit of a trough. This is sort of an extension, a secondary front, if you will, extending off of this low pressure area here. And then if you look up to the north here, you'll see that little trough just along the coast that I was talking about. Again, this is a semi-permanent feature, and you can see it analyzed on this chart. But more importantly, we have high pressure coming in out of the Great Lakes, and that was a big, huge feature as it turned out for this race. We were in this post-frontal northerly flow to start with, and then by the next day, that high had moved to the mid-Atlantic coast and was oozing out across the course from west to east. And under high pressure, typically the winds are much lighter. And so we ended up with a very light race. Winds were extremely light, and navigating through this high pressure was the key to doing well in this race. The other thing I want to point out is that subtropical ridge. Now remember, I talked about that as being sort of sitting in here on average, but in this year, because we had this front moved out here, that subtropical ridge had moved way down to the south, was sitting way down here. And this high pressure was moving out up here to the north and kind of helping to push that subtropical ridge to the south. So that was a little bit different from what we see. And then you can see here on the following day, that ridge way down here to the south. Sorry, just there we go, that ridge way down here to the south, and really this new high sort of coming out, which eventually would merge into this subtropical ridge. And that was one of the forecast challenges for this race, was how this new high was going to merge into the subtropical ridge over time, because it was all happening pretty much over the race course. Now, the year before, the race before 2016, we had a very different condition. We started out with a frontal system sitting down here to the south, again, just lying just to the north of Bermuda, and high pressure moving off of the New England coast here. And remember, the flow around high pressure is clockwise. So the airflow, you can see these observations here. And again, if you go to Marine Weather University, there's actually a little free thing anybody can watch that talks about how to read these charts. And you can see a northeast wind there, basically northeast flow across the race course. And then here we have a low pressure area, which is moving off the southeastern US coast. And this caused quite a different kind of race, in the sense that by the following day, we had this low sitting down here to the south. Our course is running right here. If I can draw it, there we go. Running down like this. And so we had northeast, the high pressure kind of slowly moving off the New England coast, and a strong northeast wind between the high pressure to the north and this low pressure to the south. And if I'm not mistaken, the record was set this year because we had this strong reaching wind that was along the coast, along the course rather, heading straight to Bermuda. So you do have different kind of weather conditions from year to year. And so it's important to sort of monitor these conditions in advance of the race. Another thing that's important in this race is current. We have a major global ocean current that moves directly through the center of the course. Here you see the rum line from Newport up here to the north to Bermuda to the south, and right through the middle of the course we have the Gulf Stream, which is a fast current that can be up to 3, maybe 4 knots at times, which is moving generally to the northeast, but it doesn't move in a straight line. And it has these little turns, twists and turns in it. And then also there are little eddy features that break off from time to time from this and make the current flow more complicated. So in races like 2018, where you have very light winds, these currents become extremely important. They're always important, but the lighter the wind, the bigger the impact of the current. So in addition to the weather, monitoring the current and how it is behaving prior to the start is also another important task that you have ahead of you. So if we look at the average wind conditions, so these are all the winds averaged over about a 10-year period, this is what we end up with. We have generally the Bermuda high sitting down here to the south east of Bermuda. We have the subtropical ridge in here, and that's where lighter winds, these cool colors, are lighter wind speeds on average. And then up here to the north, where remember we have that trough that sits across this area, and the westerlies moving weather systems across here, we have southwest winds. So we have a southwesterly flow between the high pressure to the south and the lower pressure to the north. That's on average. Now, these are vector averages, so you have to keep in mind that if the wind is blowing from the west half the time at 10 knots and then blowing from the east half the time from 10 knots, you end up with a 0 average. So keep that in mind in interpreting these charts. What we're seeing up here, although it shows the winds to be lighter, is largely a lot of variability. One other thing we're seeing is something very interesting. Remember, I pointed out the Gulf Stream. Notice where the wind is stronger. And it tends to be strongest over the Gulf Stream because where the water is warmer, it promotes mixing of higher momentum air from above down to the surface. So when you cross over the Gulf Stream, typically there's an increase, a jump in the wind speed. Alternatively, up here to the north, there's a cold current moving down, the Labrador current moving down to the south west, bringing cold water, and that prevents mixing, and we get an inversion over the water, and that makes it lighter up in this area here. So the water temperature is not only telling us what the current is doing, it also gives us a feel for how well mixed the atmosphere will be and how that affects the wind speed. Now we can also take all that wind data and just kind of look at how the wind varies down the track. So here I've just overlaid the sort of a general current from the Gulf Stream, sort of showing it moving through kind of the center of the course. And we're going to go down the course and look at the wind frequency at each one of these stars. So starting out with this one that is southeast of Newport, on the right-hand side, we have what I call, or what is called, a windrose. And the windrose is a wind speed and direction frequency diagram. So the way you read these is the length of the pedal tells you how the percentage of time that the wind blows from that direction. So in this case, we have 22% of the time the wind is blowing from the southwest. That's up at this first star just to the south east of Newport. And then the colors in here go down to this scale at the bottom, which show us the wind speed, and the length of that color range gives us the amount of time that the wind blows from that direction. So you can see that the predominant wind is from the southwest. And again, that's all in line, right, with our average surface weather map, where we have the high pressure down here, the Bermuda High, and we have lower pressure up here. And so the wind is flowing clockwise around that and coming in from the southwest across this section. We do see from time to time, just as like we experienced in 2016, northeast winds. And the other interesting thing is when it blows from the northeast, it's usually pretty strong. You see that in the way that the colors are indicated on these pedals. Now let's go a little bit further down the track, just to the north of the Gulf Stream. Here's what the windrose looks like. Again, pretty similar. We're seeing a little bit more westerly component, but basically the southwest is predominant. And again, when we do occasionally get winds from the north, northeast, and when they do blow from that direction, they're usually pretty strong. Keep going down the track. Now we're going through the Gulf Stream and coming out the other side. And again, same sort of thing. We're seeing the winds a bit stronger because we're kind of getting into that core of the gradient between the high pressure and the low, but also we're in the warmer water. So we're seeing more mixing. So we go back to that other diagram that I showed that showed through the Gulf Stream, the average wind speed tends to be higher. And we can see that effect on the windrose here on the right. Now let's go a little bit further down the track, just to the north or to the northwest of Bermuda. And again, we see that the predominant winds, 27% of the time, is from the west-southwest. So we're seeing how significant that flow is around the high pressure. We are starting to see some other sort of oddball directions show up, though. There's this south-southeast direction. And what we're starting to see are some of the effects of when that subtropical ridge moves further to the north or when it drops further to the south. We're starting to see some more variability in the wind direction. It's not quite as persistent. When we get closer to Bermuda, we see considerably more variability and also a general decrease in the wind speeds. Again, this is because the subtropical ridge is oftentimes very close to Bermuda. So looking at these frequency diagrams, looking at the averages, tells us a lot about the most likely conditions that you're going to be sailing in. But again, it all depends on the weather of the day. As we saw in those surface charts that I presented, there's definitely some significant changes that can occur from time to time. So one other thing we like to do is that's great. I understand the basic weather patterns that I'm going to see, but how can I learn more about how those weather patterns are going to affect my boat? And one of the ways we can do that is by running a historical routing and wind study. And so we did that for North Sales, and you'll see some of the results of that again in the next webinar here. But I'm going to kind of introduce what we did, but I'm also going to tell you how you can do these on your own. So basically, what we do is we go back and we have the historical grid files for the last, I forget exactly how many years, but I think it's, oh, there it is, 2012 through 2019. So we've got 8 years of weather data, and this is online. I'll show you where you can get it soon. And so we're basically looking at the modeled data, but this is called reanalysis data. So this isn't from a forecast model. It's basically showing the starting point of a model, which is an analysis. So it's taking in all the data that's available and mapping it to a grid and giving us what the wind speed and direction is across an area that we might sail through. Because you're not going to sail directly down the rumline course. I showed you the wind roses directly down the rumline course, but you're not going to sail there. You're going to sail as a function of what the wind direction is, and also you're going to be using some strategy to try and get into the optimum lane to get from Newport to Bermuda. And so this analysis is going to allow us to do that. So we can simulate the optimum routes using software. In this case, I use Expedition, and develop probability tables. So as the boat sails down through this simulated weather, using your performance polar, we calculate the true wind angle and true wind speed as you go along, and then we can accumulate those through a reasonable time period to come up with a frequency table of true wind angle and true wind speed for your boat. And this is really useful for sail selection, rating optimization, and even learning some of the navigation challenges and the weather challenges that you have for this race. So this data I make freely available on my website. And the way we do this is we do 31 races for each year. And what I'm doing is I'm starting a race at noon, basically at each year, each day, 15 days prior to the start date, and again, 15 days after the start date. So you end up with 31 simulated races. And the idea there is to try and capture a range of meteorological conditions. If we just did the one day that we were interested in, we just get whatever weather happens to be on that day, but we don't know the exact weather conditions. We want to sort of collect the possible range of conditions that we could encounter. So that's how this process is done. So if you go to my website, sailwx.com, you can click on the file share menu button up here in the upper right. And from there, you need to sign up and become a site member. It's free. And once you do that, then you can download these grid files. And there's one file for each year. So from 2012 through 2019. And you can put these into your routing software and do this analysis just like I described. And when we do that, we end up with a route cloud. So in this case, I'm showing two different route clouds, one with a J120 polar, and on the right side is a J160 polar. And we see sort of the range of possible routes that could be taken between in this race. And you'll notice they're not the same. They are different from one polar to the next because they are specific to that boat. And there's also some statistics that you can draw out here, like what the average length of time in the race would be, what the fastest time, the slowest time, and some other statistics that you can draw out of there. But the most important thing that we provide, and this has been provided to North Sales, and again, they'll be talking a little bit about this and how you can use this to address your sail chart, your sail selection, your sail inventory. basically what comes out of this is this accumulation of the true wind angle and true wind speed along each one of these routes. And what you end up with is a frequency table such as this. And so across the top here, call this the x-axis, is the true wind angle. And then the y-axis is the true wind speed. And so throughout that historical record, this is the range of wind speeds that were observed. So sort of from calm up to 32 knots. And then here's the true wind angle that is experienced. And what we're looking for are hot spots. So we're looking for areas like this here, where we have high frequencies. And these are areas that you'll want to address because this is basically, the percent of time that you'll spend sailing at this true wind angle and this true wind speed here. And you can accumulate all of this and also come up with, well, what's the percent of time that it blows 16 knots? What's the percent of time it blows 22 knots? And do some sort of sub statistics within this. And what you see here is that this is not generally a downwind race. Sometimes it is, but it would be pretty unusual. So these percentages down in the downwind true wind angles are relatively small, but we have two basic hotspots. We've got one hotspot here, sort of in the upwind angles, and then we have another hotspot here in the reaching angles, and a little bit in between those two as well. And so when you overlay this on your sail chart, this tells you a lot about which sails that you're going to be using most frequently in this race. So this is pretty powerful information and very, very useful information. As I said, there are other things you can do with this. One is you can actually, in most of these routing softwares, you can actually animate the routing and animate the weather simultaneously. And this can be very educational to understand how the boat has to be sailed relative to certain weather patterns that are encountered. So this is very powerful. This is a very powerful tool. It's not the answer, but it can tell you a lot about what you're going to be encountering in this race. So I strongly recommend learning more about this. And you can actually use this for other boats here. So actually I had J160 up here at the top. It's actually a fast 40 boat. Again, its chart looks a lot different from the J120 boat, doesn't it? There's a little bit wider angles and more upwind here and different true wind angles. So that boat is what you see there is how that boat has to be sailed differently than a J120 does in order to get down the coast, sailing through the same weather as the J120, but it has to be sailed differently because of its design. So pretty interesting and powerful stuff. And with that, Peter, I'll open up to questions.
All right, great. Chris, thank you very much. Good job. I have a question before we dig into a couple of some of the ones that were posted, and that is with because the Gulf Stream is a feature on the racetrack, is there anything that sailors should be thinking about or learn about with respect to how just that the hot water and the Gulf Stream feature affects wind, and keep an eye out for that from squalls to light air?
Yeah, good point. First of all, because it's sort of this ribbon of warm water, it acts a little bit like land does during the day. So it's heating the air from below. So what happens is the air tends to rise due to that heating, and that kind of on either side of the Gulf Stream, especially on the north side, it sort of tilts the direction to flow in toward that convergence of rising air. And so it can be, it can affect the wind direction. It can also affect the, there can be convergence clouds marking that, and oftentimes showers. So you may be in clear air north of the Gulf Stream as you sail south, where the water is colder, and then you cross over the Gulf Stream and you can start to have some showers or even squalls once you get into that warmer water.
Right. And another cool thing, there were about a bunch of questions about the weather routing tool. A good weather routing program like Expedition will actually include the effect of the current on the how the current changes your true wind. Of course, when there's current flow, it changes the true wind. So whereas the weather models that you're using are not considering that, they consider the atmosphere. But on a boat, we're dealing with two different reference frames, and that's an important thing to keep in mind as well, especially when you're doing the routing in race or coming up to the last few days. You're no longer doing the historical one, but you're really looking at individual models. There was another question about the pedal diagrams you showed earlier. Do you want to reveal where you got those? It's, you know, in the old days, we would look at a thing called pilot charts. People probably don't even know what that is anymore.
Yeah, well, I actually I got those from a site at Oregon State University. They ran a site that accumulated all that information. Notice I just used a keyword there, ran. That site is no longer available. It's unfortunate because it was a really powerful site, allowed you to go and get those historical wind plots for 15-day blocks out of anywhere on the globe for any time of year. But unfortunately, you can't do that now. So I'm someone like myself, I actually build them myself now using, because I have access to long-term historical data. So far, I haven't found a suitable replacement for that site yet.
Chris, I know that you do, you also provide your services for boats. I've taken advantage of it whenever I can for the race. Is that something you'll be doing again this year?
I will. I do provide forecasts and routing, usually online weather briefings for boats, but my approach is very specific to boat. So I don't have a lot of slots available. So if anyone's interested, they better get in the door quick. I'm already signing boats up. So.
All right. Well, you can find him, sailwx.com. That's where he is. All right. We're going to keep moving along here, and you can keep posting those questions in the chat room. But the show will continue, and we'll shift over to navigation. There's a picture of yours truly on board in a nav station of some boat somewhere, and a Gulf Stream image. I have a quick little sea story. The first Bermuda race I ever did, it was in the days before satellite navigation. I'm that old. And the navigator, I was the skipper, or sort of the person in charge. And before the start, the navigator, who was also the owner, gave me the rum line. Said, okay, you got to steer. This is the rum line to Bermuda. And so I kept that in my head, and I used the good old techniques we used back then, VMC and sailing the closest tack to the mark, and towards that bearing. And those same skills are very important to still have today. And we got about a day and a half into the race, 2 days into the race, that woke up in the morning, and we were with much bigger boats. It was really rough. And we're sailing along on a close reach, which, as you know, you've seen the average winds this race typically is some sort of a close reach or a reach, and reaching sails and reaching performance is very important. And we were doing great. I mean, we were so overachieving. We were the boats 5-6 feet bigger. And at that point, the navigator owner came up on deck and said, Pedro, I just checked, and the rum line isn't what I told you. It's 15 degrees different. And he had given me the true degrees to Bermuda rather than the magnetic degrees. Yet hedging 15 degrees off enabled us to get way ahead. So those are the old days of weather routing. Navigating the Bermuda race today, preparation. We're going to take a look at preparation, instruments and polars, weather, talk a little bit about the Gulf Stream, weather routing, and data access. We'll get into a lot more depth than that in the course that we have on the Bermuda race in Marine Weather University at the Eisler Academy. But the first step to getting into the navigation game these days, I try to again, take a step back and say, what would I do if I was getting on the boat? The first thing I do is find out about the boat's instruments and try to enhance the instrument tuning, because it's garbage in, garbage out with respect to the weather routing that we do. And we saw the differences between the two polars that Chris had, the differences in the results. Well, if you have a correct polar and an incorrect polar, one that says you go 10% slower at a 60-degree wind angle, and that's wrong, then you're going to get more of a wrong answer. And you're already dealing with a bunch of vagaries here when it comes to weather routing. So you're trying to get everything as perfect as you can get it. And how perfect does it have to be? It's never perfect. And so this instrument tuning and the calibration that we do is ongoing. The most important things to work on are your boat speed cals and your wind cals. And of course, I'll take even a further step back. And when I get on a boat, I get to the point where I figure out what sensors they have, how they're installed, and do some little trickery to make sure the boat speed and the wind instruments are working as good as possible before I even get into the calibration. And I use Expedition, a long-time user, big fan. And there's a picture of StripChart, one of its co-modules, that is very helpful, both live and post sail time, going back and looking at your instrument tuning. There we have the bands of the red band, vertical band show wands, and you can see the averages between attack in that case and see how the wind direction is wobbled, which in this case, the second row down, it wobbled a lot, like 11 degrees. So we had some work to do. Then we shift from the instruments. Another thing that's very important in the components of the navigation game these days, where the weather routing is so important in the tools, is the refining of polars. And as I pointed out earlier, garbage in, garbage out. You want your polars to represent how the boat's going to sail and its performance. And the best way I know to do that is to take the boat's past performance when we had good calibration and average it out and try to match your polars to what the boat has done in the past. Calibrate first. Keep your polars simple and smooth, because if you have too many rows and columns, this is a polar diagram in Expedition, it's impossible. If you find out, like at 110 degrees and 20 knots, that this boat really goes 25 knots, well, you have to adjust the other cells right around it as well. And if you have 22 columns and 20 rows of wind speed, a wind speed every knot, you got a lot of work to do, too much work to do. Keep it simple for weather routing. Another thing you're going to want to be doing is getting together your sources of weather information. Here I have an image of how I get the GFS, our tax dollars at work, the global model that the Noaa provides and puts out through its supercomputers. And I'm getting it through the SailDocs application within Expedition. But it's very important to get your skills down, not only knowing what sources you're going to be using during the race, but how to be able to get them efficiently, because the navigator's job, you only have so many hours in the day. And I'll be talking a bit later about how you don't want to spend your whole life down below at the nav station. Another thing that's very important is preparing for low bandwidth. We all get used to being hooked into the fast internet at home or in the hotel room before the start of the race. And then we get out on the boat and you can't get the data. I did a race to Mexico last year, and the high-speed satellite didn't work at all because the boat's carbon mainsail was blocking the satellite that we're trying to log into. So I had a backup plan, and it was much slower speeds, but without the preparation, you are screwed. And the job is getting so techy now for navigation that you've got to be good, and you've got to be thinking about this way ahead of time. You also need to figure out in your own mind how you're going to deal with the psychology of the fear of missing out and the fear of a better option, because as we get our emails from anybody from Predict Wind, all the different sources, all our different weather apps, there's so many different models. I need to look at all of them in order to decide. And as you learn in Marine Weather University's classes about weather models, at some point enough is enough, and you really have to start limiting what you look at if you want to be able to stay sane and even be efficient. That's what the pros do. And I point again to our classes of Marine Weather University, which I'm very proud of. If you want to learn more, and a lot of the questions were too techy to really get into now, the Marine Weather University, it's a college level education in marine weather aimed at sailors. All right, so what about weather information? I talked about we talked about the sources. Here's another shot of that Ocean Prediction Center's analysis, which Chris said is so important to get familiar with. A real human has actually analyzed all that weather model stuff and is putting their mind and to it and their scientific knowledge and experience. Here's an example of a cheat sheet that I would prepare before the start of a race, so that I had all the links that I might want to use during the race all already set out and easily get. The last thing you're going to be doing is browsing around on Edge or Chrome on satellite bandwidth. It's just too slow and too expensive and not fast. You need to be prepared ahead of time. And here you can see I have my observations. You know, at different times you want to know what's available, and at different times you'll be looking for different bits of information along with those ubiquitous grid files that is used for routing. Gulf Stream information. I asked Chris that question about the Gulf Stream, but it's in this race, it's important to understand how current affects not only the wind direction and wind speed, which everybody should know, but a lot of people don't really understand correctly. Is there a lead bow effect or not? I'll leave that with you. And also sea state, because although the Gulf Stream is just, you know, maybe the passage is less than 10% of the entire race, it's an important part of it, a tactical feature, and it can really affect the wind and those eddies. Excuse me, the circulars, the gyres, both north and south of the mainstream, remain a tactical feature throughout the entire race. And there's another image of the Gulf Stream. Understanding the Gulf Stream and getting prepared with the weather for that, or getting prepared for the information for that as to how you're going to incorporate that in your routing, is a whole other aspect. I oftentimes, like I use Chris and his services to help me get prepared before a big race. I have some favorite oceanographers and scientists that help me with this, as well as the available grid files that you can download. And it looks so perfect, but is it? There we see a grid file pulled in, free grid file, the RTOFS, that you can get straight into Expedition, and very helpful for doing the routing with if you don't want to make manual grid files. And then weather routing. You need to practice and get good at this. Here, an example of an ensemble routing, slightly different than what Chris did, although it looks the same with a bunch of root clouds. In this case, I did a routing just the other day from Newport to Bermuda using 25 different weather models, the global ensemble, the GFS ensemble members, and some other global models, put them all into Expedition, did a single ensemble routing, and got all these different solutions. This is not something I do during the race, but in the 2 weeks, 10 days prior to the race, very important to do to get your head around the tactics and the features, weather features, and how the race is likely to play out. In fact, there is all the solution, or some of the solutions there. You can see every weather model has a different speed of how long the race will take and how many distance you sail, etc. If you have a sail chart in there, it'll tell you what sails you use. And then you can produce, this is similar to what Chris just showed us, but again, this is for a single start time, not over a long period of time. And it gives us an average again. And I find this very helpful in getting not only me, the navigator, but the entire crew's head around what the race is going to be like. And I'll start sending out an ensemble routing every day in the week plus leading up to a big ocean race. And there you can see with the sail chart at the bottom, the percentage of hours, the number of hours or percentage of time any sale in the sale list is used. And as Tim Dawson, and you'll learn in the next webinar in 2 weeks, I believe, we will, they'll talk about sale charts and the importance of having those being accurate as well to help you not only preparing for what inventory you're going to bring in the race when you make that final call of are we going to bring the throw or not. Looks like we better bring it in this case. If for those of you that are super interested or more interested in learning about weather models, again, I point you towards one of Chris's courses in Marine Weather University, Weather Models 201, which is an advanced class in weather models. And you will learn that you can't rely on them. Like the way you think of them and you see them on the computer screen is just providing a yellow brick road or a dotted line of what to follow. It will scare you to death, and it'll put realism into it, and it'll also make you a better decision maker out on the race course. All right, so when you're navigating a race like this, I love this shot because it's me and the skipper on board. This is a Mod 70 trimaran, and I've got my tablet on deck, but where's the navigator? The navigator is on deck. He or she is looking at the sky, maybe even sailing the boat, paying attention to the weather. If you're just stuck down below on the computer, you are limiting your utility. Not only are you not in the right place, probably for weight position on the boat for speed, but you're also limiting what you do. Now, if you don't practice a lot, or you're trying to do too much in the nav station, you can stay down there 24/7. I remember a movie I saw once, a film that was done on the Bermuda race, the boat that won, and the navigator was so proud he only slept 1 hour, and maybe not even that during the entire, he never left the nav seat. Well, to me, that's not the way a modern navigator operates. A modern navigator is engaged with the crew. And it's important that the information that the navigator gets on the computer, wherever they get, or the weather knowledge they have, is imparted to the crew. And how you deliver the message is really important. In fact, some crews that I coach and that I sail with, I work on developing a nomenclature and practicing how we go about talking about a plan and a game plan and a short-term strategy and a long-term strategy. So I can come up on deck, or the navigator can come up on deck and be able to impart information that is understood by the crew, rather than just sounding like, a college professor that you don't understand. You want to be like Stan Honey, where he makes everything sound easy. And that takes practice if you're a navigator. You want to be inclusive. You want to include anybody who's interested. It's not just the afterguard, but the speed team in the game plan, because that helps with the team psychology. Talked about having a practice system and nomenclature. I like it when the watch captains come down to the nav seat, if I'm down there, before they go on deck, and get a quick 5-minute overview. And I get really good at presenting the screens that are important to see for them. And this is important to be inclusive, because you get buy-in, because you're not always going to be right, but the team's got to be unified in the direction they go. Or if they're not unified, you want to have a discussion and be able to come up with a plan that everybody can live with. You don't want a mutiny on the Bermuda race. Talked about it already, but the navigator should spend a lot of time on deck. Not only do you come up every time you do a new routing to give the information, or you get some cogent information on the enemy, maybe you've been tracking them on AIS, but you also want to be paying attention to the weather and looking at the sky. Don't wake up surprised. If possible, don't stand to watch, float, and therefore you can pick your times when you take your cat naps or your naps, and hopefully it's in a time period where there won't be new information coming in on the internet, and hope it's your forecast has given you the indication that things are going to remain fairly stable. Stay rested. 1 hour sleep is not right. You end up working slower and making poor decisions when you're not rested. what are some of the skills that a navigator has to have? I mean, I just made a few of them here, but it's fun to think about. They need to be able to understand the operation of the sailing instruments and calibrations. You got to be an IT somewhat of an expert or have somebody really good like Arnie Means working with you to set up your boat, networking and computers. You need to be an expert and facile with working your sailing software and the interfacing of the sailing instruments and your computers so you can get that information up on deck. The thing I hate is to just have all the information on the tablet. I try to get the cogent information up on the displays for the sailors. Got to be good at weather routing, race tracking. We don't talk about that here, but it's an important part of any race because your strategy may be affected by where the competition is. And you got to be good at communication, as we just talked about. And don't forget being able to bail, cook, and oh yeah, you got to navigate too and not sail up on the kitchen shoals. We can't leave without talking about the race boat electronics and satellite data. My general theory is to try to keep the system as simple as possible. Do not get too fancy. I've been on plenty of boats where just, they had all the bells and whistles. It got a little wet or they just stopped working. I try to have my system as basic as possible. Installed by a marine electronics professional, so the connections aren't, home level guy. I get on boats a lot of times where the owner's IT person from the office comes in and sets things up, and that's a nightmare. That's a recipe for a nightmare. A good marine electronics professional knows how to make things rugged enough so they'll stand up to the boat, because you need that stuff to work. And it's hard enough when a carbon mainsail gets in the way of your satellite. Prepare for extreme conditions. Although that race that Chris just showed us was a light air race, this race can be really rough and wet down below and wet on deck. And you need to be able to, the system has to be able to handle that jarring around in water and have a backup plan. I can't tell you enough how I gave you the example of where the main satellite system didn't give me communication ability. So I was able to switch to my Iridium and very slowly get the information I needed to be able to navigate the boat in that race to Mexico. But you need to be thinking about what if in the weeks leading up to the race. If possible, I try to spend quite a bit of time down below at the nav station, even at the dock and stuff, with a good internet connection from before the race and for a few days before the race, getting everything just set up perfectly so I can spend more time on deck and not be figuring out how to work things down below. Another job of the navigator is to be part of dealing with safety and emergencies. You need to be very well versed in how the procedure from a man overboard and how you're probably involved with the installation and how the on-deck man overboard button works and how that information that goes in through your computer to your instrument systems and gets back on deck and how all that works. Obviously, it's important, I think, to always have channel 16 on in a race like this 24/7. We generally have it on deck, on a handheld, and also down below in the navigators down there, so that if any of our friends, maybe it's you, maybe it's me, needs a little help, that's way more important than a race. And if don't have our ears on to call for aid from our fellow sailors, then we're really doing everybody a disservice. Yes, this is about racing and winning, but nobody's life is worth not ignoring that sort of thing. And listen to channel 16. I'll be listening for you. Make me a deal. You listen for me, please. Understand your hardware. It's important ahead of time, is to have all your emergency contact numbers and links sorted out before the start of the race. Program your sat phones for that if you have to ditch, or if the main satellite phone doesn't work and you have to use the handheld in the ditch bag. It's got the emergency numbers or your doctor or whatever numbers you need to to be safe. That's already pre-programmed in there. Your travel agent. Don't be a hero. There's a picture of me navigating in a transatlantic race on the Rambler 100, trying to be a hero probably, but I have my gear on, so it shows that I was spending some time on deck, despite the how nice and dry it was down below. Get some rest, be efficient, and practice. Practice, practice, practice makes perfect. So you can do a better job when the race happens. I strongly recommend Chris's classes on marine weather. We have just on MWU, we've just launched a Newport to Bermuda class where we'll go into a lot more detail, especially on the expedition and navigation side of the things, to help to go a little bit more detail than we can in this class. And there's expedition software classes at North U and the Eisler Academy. We have, just for you guys in the live webinar, a special sale through the weekend. Fast Sales is the coupon code, 15% off anything in Marine Weather U. Thanks for being here today, and thanks for North Sails for supporting us. As I said, Tim Dawson and his team from North Sails will be giving their seminar on December 9th. Same time, same bat place. You have to sign up for it again. There's a complete separate Zoom registration that has to go, and that'll be fascinating. And here's a quick tease, as Chris talked about, where they'll be taking the information that Chris provided from the historical study and start superimposing them on real sail charts and showing what they would do to work with a client ahead of time. Other things, there's a bunch, because this is such a reaching race, a lot of the focus is on making sure the reaching inventory is ready for the passage. And there's some of the new jargon for what we call reaching sails. And then of course, this is an offshore race, and not only are they required, but you should know how to use them. And they'll be talking about the heavy weather and storm sails too. So that'll be a great class. I know I'll be attending it. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and see if we've got any questions here. A quick scrolling in. Oh, good point, Justin. Boats using their best efforts. Not only do I like to keep my AIS, my VHF on channel 16, but another safety thing is keeping your AIS on. And in some races that's required. In other races it's not. Almost every AIS on a boat I've been on has a silent mode, but when you go silent, they can't see you. So I like it when everybody has the AIS on, because it just allows us all to not only know where we are, where the competition is for race tracking purposes, but it's better for safety. Chris, do you have any final thoughts?
AIS is really important if you're in an ultimate trimaran going 35 knots average.
Oh, come on. Give me a screenshot of what you're doing right now. Chris's day job. You guys, Chris's day job is so interesting. He has to sit in the hot desert and wake up at all hours, or stay awake at all hours, coaching, live coaching these extreme sailors going at breakneck speeds around the planet. And this is in a race where there are no rules. So what we do, who needs a navigator when you have Chris? And they don't care what time of day it is at home.
Well, we've got 2 navigators and on shore and me. And probably there have been 100,000 texts between, and I'm not exaggerating, between the boat and us. It's pretty spectacular.
Wow. Well, once again, everybody, thank you for joining us on behalf of North Sails and Marine Weather University, Chris Bedford and myself. It's always fun to share our knowledge and talk about stuff we love and the information that we have learned over the years, and never stop learning. That's because there's always more to learn, and hopefully it'll be a great race this year. And in any event, it's fun to dream about it and to get prepared and to feel like when you leave the dock that list is on a single piece of paper. So without further ado, I'm going to thank everybody on behalf of North Sales. Chris, have a great night. All you guys, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks everyone.